Hey, what's up guys? Jimmy back with you, Timeless Steel. Haven't really posted anything in a while. I had one of them days today, so I'm gonna get some stuff done in the shop. Tonight, I'm going to show you how to box one of these lower control arms on a DeLorean. So, me personally, I think this is a terrible design. It's not safe. It might have been cool in the 80s with Lotus Engineering, but this is a hollow stamp control arm that's made out of 16 gauge steel. They tend to crack and break right here, and the wheel will literally fall off. So I won't put my family in a car with a control arm like this. So what we can do for people who want to keep the original look is we can make this significantly stronger. We box the bottom of it in and put a reinforcement collar around the ball joint sleeve itself. These things really, I think their intention with them was to be replaceable arms, not replaceable ball joints, but the company went out of business. And what happens is when you replace this ball joint, after a while, these collars that hold the ball joint, the metal stretches so much that the ball joint's known to just be loose in there. So that's what I'm working on tonight, and I'll be back with you once I get this all apart and I go to weld this thing up. All right, everybody. So I've got the right side lower control arm off. This is the left side that I've already built up, and this is a stock right lower. Now to give you an idea, this ball joint's, I was able to whack this ball joint out by just literally setting it on the vise and hitting it with a welder's hammer or a metalsmith hammer, whatever you want to call it. But blacksmith hammer, man, it's late. Anyhow, if you look at this control arm, it's literally a stamped 16 gauge, really flimsy piece. And what happens is this ball joint stake hole here just gets hogged out, and by pushing another ball joint in there, it's really hard to not balloon the control arm, and they get to the point where if you replace that ball joint more than once, they start to not even hold the ball joint tight in there. So you can look at this one and see what I've done. I've put a reinforcement collar around the back side of the control arm. You can see it's that silver piece around the outside of the ball joint here that this one doesn't have. And then I've welded a 16 gauge piece to kind of box the frame in. Now, I get these from DeLorean Go, and they're really convenient. They're pre-cut and they're easy. But if you want to do it yourself, I mean, you could literally just trace this shape out on a piece of paper, take your measurements, download QCAD, which is free, draw it up in QCAD, and I like to get my stuff laser cut at SendCutSend. SendCutSend.com, I think is what it is. But you upload your file, you select the metal, material, the thickness, and I usually have my parts back within 5 days. So if you want to make these yourself, this is so thin, you could literally just buy a piece of 16 gauge steel and get some aviation style tin snips and literally just cut the shape out and rough it in. A good pair of snips, like some Lennox snips right here, you could cut this metal, it's that thin. So I don't pretend to be a pro welder. My dad was a pro welder and my uncle's a pro welder. I've learned everything I've learned from them, everything I know from them, and I'd call myself an adequate welder. But the number one thing that's most important that both of them taught me is a clean welding surface. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean this up, and I'll be back as soon as we're ready for the next step. All right, so as you can see, I've got cleaned up the surface here as best as I can, and it's important with whatever sheet metal you're using, it's all shipped with a protective coating on it. It looks like bare metal, but you can see once you actually clean the edges what the coating looks like and the bare metal actually looks like. And you'll be able to tell if you didn't clean this good enough, because as you're welding, if you start hearing snack, crackle, pop, popcorn noises, then your metal's dirty. So I have a couple of welding pliers here, and some regular old vice grips, and I have a big hammer. Basically what you want to do is kind of line up where you want this metal to be, and then start forcing it into place. And all you're trying to do is hold it in a spot that you can tack weld. I don't like where this is sitting, so. All these lowers that are in DeLoreans, I swear everyone's a little bit different. None of these line up perfectly. So you just kind of got to get it to where you can weld both sides evenly. And I think a lot of it is these things are just so stressed from driving that they just bend and they take different shapes. So I've kind of got this where I want it. Now I'm going to go ahead and get my welder set up, and once I'm ready, I'll show you guys that. All right, back with you. So this is my setup. It's a Miller 211 that my family was nice enough to buy me as a gift a few years back. This is a pretty expensive welder. I think this is about a $2,000 setup, if I remember. But I've got it set up for 110, so I can show you guys that might have a Hobart or a Harbor Freight unit, or this is your first time welding something that you don't need 220 power to weld thin gauge like this. So I got this 75-25 CO2 argon mix. I'm gonna turn my gas on here. I want about a 25 to 28 on the gauge here, and most of these new welders have an auto set feature where you can basically just select what wire size you're running, 0.30, 0.35 for MIG, and select your gauge on the metal thickness. I've already got mine set up from boxing the other control arm. The more practice you get, I started out doing pretty much all auto set, and as I've gotten better, I try to fine tune things a little bit. So if you don't have an auto set welder, usually your welder has a diagram on the inside of it, and you can see I'm running 0.35 MIG wire, just US forged. It works just fine. I've got my tension set. Generally you want your tension to be where you can take your MIG wand, push it on the ground, pull the trigger, and it'll still feed wire. Okay, so I'm doing steel. I'm using 75-25 argon CO2. And I'm using 0.35 welding wire. So I follow that over to the 16 gauge column, and it tells me that my heat needs to be 4.5 or voltage, and my wire speed needs to be 35. I like to weld with a little bit higher heat than what it tells me, but I've got this preset, so we're good to go. Just got to plug this thing in, turn it on. I'm gonna pull the trigger on my handle here, see where the gas is at. I gotta turn it up a little bit. All right, 25, that's good. So you guys can watch along here as I just kind of spot weld this up to get the shape that I want. Alright, here we go. You hear that popcorn sound? That's exactly what I was telling you guys about dirty metal. dip your tip in the tip dip, if you know what I'm saying. Alright, so I'm tired and I'm trying to shoot a video, but you can see now I've got this metal basically tacked in place where I want it. Now I can kind of use my metal hammer here to force the metal down to where I want it to be. And as I get it close, I can use my welding pliers to force it into shape. We're going to go back and lay some more spots down. Spot here that was lifted that I'm not a big fan of. Alright, so there you can see I've got my piece basically spot welded. The metal's where it's going to be. Now I'm going to clean it up with a wire brush and start welding. Alright, well, try to get comfortable here. Get myself a chair and start welding. Well, can you guys see me all right there? All right. And here we go. So there you can see the basic idea. Obviously I'm gonna keep working this piece, but I could leave it just the way it is. I mean, that's plenty of weld on this. You don't need to fully box or fully weld the seam to get the strength, but this is the way I have the other one looking. So I'm gonna do the same thing to this one, which you guys don't wanna probably watch me do, but anyways, that's it. That's boxing your control arms. I highly recommend the steel reinforcement collar. I like to use the British ball joints, and I'll show you why here, especially if you're in a DeLorean community. Now these come with nylon lock nuts on them, which I'm not a big fan of, but you could always drill and add a cotter pin yourself. That's original, and that's the British one. And it's a much nicer, heavier duty unit. Big fan of these. And then some other things. These control arms, when the car is driving, they sit in the pocket like this, and the only thing holding them moving forward and aft is a sway bar and a singular bolt in the back. So these things move like this while you're going down the road, which is ridiculous. So I also, for safety, add a Wishbone style support collar. These ones are sold by DeLorean Europe, and they work really well. And basically it takes this single stamp control arm and turns it into a Wishbone style, where these support each side of the control arm. If I can, tired, my brain's not working. But anyhow, you can see if the frame was right here, these go like this and turn this single arm into a modern Wishbone style arm, where it can't move forward and aft and doesn't solely rely on the sway bar. So I think these three things are huge safety upgrades. Boxing the arm, putting a collar around the ball joint, upgrading the ball joint, and going to a Wishbone style. Now there's multiple different versions of this from different vendors, or you can make your own. But me personally, I wouldn't put my family in a DeLorean without doing these upgrades, and especially the lower ball joint on these cars takes all the abuse. So for example, this ball joint you're looking at only has 3,900 miles on it, and it's been sitting for 40 years, but it's severely rusted. The grease in it is super hard, and you can feel notchiness where the ball inside is actually rusted to the case. So just because you have a low mileage classic car doesn't mean you should be driving on your original lower ball joints. I highly recommend you change these. Same thing with the tie rods. They've just been rotted away and seized. I mean, these things have no miles on them, but they're terrible. So anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed that video. If you're a DIY person or you've never welded before, this is really something that's, I think, intimidating to a lot of folks, but it's really not that difficult. Now 16 gauge is thin, and you'll burn through and you'll make some mistakes, but that's what this good old fashioned grinder's for. Makes the bad welds go away. As long as you got good penetration, this is always gonna be better than the alternative. So anyways, we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.